talk a little bit more about leadership styles and structures, because you're going to be dealing with this material for your reports and obviously working with your groups. So what do you think about when you think of a leader and leadership styles? I think of a person who's able to make decisions and choices for others, who weigh options. There are essentially 4 different types, according to Drucker's Harvard researchers. They found that there's future-orientated leaders, risk-taking leaders, empowering leaders, and motivational leaders. Let's look a little deeper into each one of these. All of them have the same ideas and concepts in mind on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We're talking a lot about this week, and that's why I'm asking you to do these reports. I found a little thing on YouTube I want to show you. It's a couple minutes long. It's pretty good. It goes a little bit more in depth than some of the other ones. So let's take a listen just for a second to this piece.
Identifying the external opportunity.
Oops.
Many people are aware of the SWOT acronym, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. However, they are often less clear about how these factors are identified or how they could be used once the SWOT analysis is complete. In many respects, the SWOT analysis is a summary technique, identifying the external opportunities and threats to the organisation and the internal strengths and weaknesses of the organisation itself. An external analysis tool such as PESTLE helps identify opportunities and threats. For example, the possible enactment of employment legislation by the government, the L for legal in PESTLE, might threaten a company's profitability or indeed its business practice. Similarly, the emergence of more functional handheld tablets might offer a company a potential new route to market. Hence here we would be considering the T for technology in PESTLE. Porter's 5 Forces framework also provides a potential source of identifying external factors which might affect the organisation. For example, it explicitly considers the threat of new entrants and the threat of the emergence of new substitute products. These are both explicitly considered in the framework. In general, external factors are largely outside of our control. We might try and lobby the government to discourage them from enacting legislation, and we might try and deter potential entrants into new markets by starting a price war. However, ultimately, most of these external factors are outside of our control. We need to acknowledge them and potentially to react to them. In contrast, the strengths and weaknesses of an organisation are largely within our control. We can ensure that our strengths are maintained, for example by marketing initiatives that maintain the strength of our brand, and that our weaknesses are addressed, perhaps through employing better people or engineering better processes. Strengths and weaknesses are identified through internal analysis techniques such as MOST and the resource audit of both tangible and intangible assets. Once complete, the SWOT analysis can form the basis for discussing the strategic direction of the organisation. The so-called TOES matrix builds directly on the information about the strategic position of the organisation summarised in the SWOT analysis. Each quadrant of the TOES matrix is used to generate strategic options that address a combination of an internal factor, a strength or a weakness, and an external factor, an opportunity or a threat, to provide a potential strategic direction for the organisation. The top left-hand quadrant, SO, Strengths and Opportunities, generates options that use the internal strengths of the organisation to take advantage of an identified external opportunity. For example, an organisation's competencies in rubber technology might be used to exploit the opportunities of a new emerging market in flat roof refurbishment. The bottom left-hand quadrant, ST, Strengths and Threats, will help generate options that use the organisation's strengths to avoid or tackle threats. For example, instigating price cuts, exploiting the strength of the company's profit margin to deter potential entrants into the marketplace. In the top right-hand quadrant, we look at generating options that take advantage of opportunities by overcoming our weaknesses. For example, a university might address a long-term weakness in learning technology to allow them to bid for the increased number of worldwide open learning contracts. And finally, in the bottom right-hand quadrant, WT, Weaknesses and Threats, options might be generated that minimise weaknesses in the face of potential threats. For example, an organisation might wish to consider a niche strategy, perhaps providing tyres for classic racing cars, which avoids the potential threat of the major tyre companies and means that the organisation's own weaknesses, such as lack of global presence and few economies of scale, do not matter too much. Hence, SWOT represents a very useful intermediate framework between strategic position and strategic direction. Not only does it summarise the strategic position from both an external and internal perspective, it also provides a basis for moving on from that position, generating options for strategic direction which can be subsequently subjected to detailed analysis.
So this is an interesting little piece I saw. It says, and I'll try to pop in some different pieces that I see that will benefit you guys. That was definitely one, in my opinion, that had some value. It's a little deeper than what I would usually go, and I think you'll get. But back onto the idea, Weber has 3 types of people's mindsets inside of this. There's kind of the rational, which we can think about this on the idea of rank and authority. We report to our supervisor, supervisor reports to their boss, the boss reports to the CIO. We have a chain of command. There's a traditional thought of leadership to where it's belief in sanctity, to where we're conforming to a group idea. And this traditional type of leader is very much so the human resources style as well, to where they will go exactly how the core values and mission of the company is and place everything else underneath those values. Then you have a charismatic type of person. I like to think of JFK and how he was so devoted to his family, and he spread those devotions to his leadership style for America when he was in that short tenure. A very charismatic person. He had physical attributes and a presence to act this way accordingly. Mark Twain had a great statement. It was, good judgments come from experience, bad judgment comes from experience. It's kind of a double-edged sword. We're all learning. We're all experiencing different things. They might be good, they might be bad, but no matter what, we learn from each one of them. And we have to learn how to take parts and move it forward. A great leader will learn how to take these pieces and experiences and weed out the bad ones, or the information in the bad that can help the good to move forward. Colin Powell, jumped a little big there, but Colin Powell was a great leader for one reason. He called it the simplifiers. When I met him, he talked a lot about this. He said you have to have a vision, you have to have priorities, credibility, and integrity. 4 pieces of what he thought was an integral part of a leader and what made him so well. And they have to be able to simplify things and look at things and weed out the externalities and say, we can't deal with this, but we can deal with this now because it's a win-win situation. He applied a lot of this to the military tactics and when they would make maneuvers and not. Great leaders do this as well for us, even in the small groups. You can think of these people as effective managers. They have a lot of great skills that you can admire today. Maybe they time manage. They use my ideas on tips for creating 7 habits of effective students. They set goals for themselves. They set early goals. Or maybe they set timers so that they know that they got to keep on track inside their own personal calendars. They demonstrate confidence. They work well with others. Yes, communication is one of the biggest things. If you have a negative Nancy who just drags down your group, you have to be able to deal with this. And this is when people have to get together with their leader and say, how do we work with this person? You have to clearly, effectively communicate your goals. Customers are orientated for their goals, but we have to think about our internal goals to reach theirs. You can't create a platform or an interface or a simple website for someone if you don't know their goals. And if you have people in your group that won't communicate and do their jobs effectively, you have problems. This is where management comes in. This is where good leadership comes in. You have to simplify the problems and how to get around them, or better yet, create new solutions. Decision making is the hardest thing in life to do. We all do this. Every single day we make decisions, from the shoes we put on, the shirt we wear, to whether or not we turn left or right on our car in the street. Should we get gas before we head out? Should we check the oil? We all make decisions. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. But what effective leaders and good managers do is they make decisions that are courageous. They look at the values of the whole over top of themselves. And if there is a mistake, they own up to it. We all make mistakes. They also present what's called solutions and alternatives. Herrick is a great person. If you want to look more into his work and his papers, you can Google them. That talks about these ideas, about solutions and alternatives, and how courageous leaders will be the ones that fall on the sword, as they say. Analysis paralysis, it's a little covered up there, is another topic that Colin Powell used to talk about a lot in his leaderships, or if you read his books or meet him. And he will talk about the idea to where people will weigh all the analysis and the options so much that it will cause them to stop. Your group will get to this. Should we go talk to Dr. Spangler about this problem? And you'll wait 2 to 3 days thinking about it before you do and commit. It might be something as simple as saying, yes, no, I can say. Or your leader could say, I have to make this decision for us. We have to talk about our negative Nancy. We have to come out and say, look, you have to change your mindset. We want to work with you. Here's what we come up with for a probability for success. Colin Powell thought there's a 40 to 70% range. When you have 40% of the information that you think you need, or up to 70%, the rest is all gut. You should make a decision based on those facts. That gut feeling is almost always right, according to him. It gives you a probability of success. Sorry, gang. Jumped on me. So decision steps are something that you have to think about as a leader, and your team will. First, you need to define the problem. Analyze the problem itself. Consult others if you need to. Maybe you consult another group, another peer, a mentor, a teacher. You have to be able to find alternative solutions if there's a situation with a negative Nancy or a group that doesn't want to work with you. It's called win-win solution finding. If it doesn't work for you, then it's a lose-win. If it works for you but doesn't work for your client or someone else, it's a win-lose. Everything has to be at a win-win so we can move forward and make our best decisions. Best solutions always come with risks and gains. Yes, risk is a terrible thing. But sometimes you have to take the risk when you see that the gains are going to outweigh the problems. Returns versus lasting effects. You always have to make sure returns are going to outlast the effects in these risks. And make sure your timing is fitting for the needs that you're working on. Once you come up with a decision, you have to be able to come up with an idea of how to implement and commit this, communicate it effectively, and train others. This is what good leaders do. You have to monitor solutions. One of the hardest things was Kodak first came out with digital cameras in 1996. They brought the solution out of how to save money and keep themselves in business, knowing that the film and chemistry business were going to go out of business, which was their mainstay since the early 1920s. The digital camera was a huge risk for the company because nobody wanted to use it. It was very high in expense. So they brought it to a few professionals that used a lot of film and chemistry as a solution to show and demonstrate how they could save money and profits would rise. Drucker is a favorite person of mine, a Harvard think tank person, and he looks at things about being reactive or proactive. You hear me talking about proactive all the time. If you're proactive, you're never trying to chase the dragon back into its cave where it come out from. Risk is great, but one can't afford to not take it. That's a great quote from him. And I think what the most important thing to think about is how do you reduce the uncertainty and different risks that your group will have to take on? Is it a factor of time, working with somebody, a cost? Is it an idea of bringing in a mentor to reduce the uncertainty when you don't know how to program something or you don't know how to code? or whether or not this color is correct for a group that may cause a negative connotation. Herb Simon, we've all heard about and we've all loved, he came up with the idea of program risk and routine. The repetitive or automatic ideas like salaries we always get, the non-programmed or the non-routine, and the proactive situations. We want to stay away from reactive situations. Thinking about photography again is just one of my loves. Newspapers and businesses, once they adapted all this, how to start thinking about the interfaces and how fast innovations such as digital photography allowed for photography to be put on the websites. One of the things that started sneaking through where devices before would stop this, such as editors, was photographs of corpses at death scenes or wrecks or accidents where people weren't being able to be notified. They had to think of the economics, and they had to think about the ethics of being able to do this with the speed of the new interface and a new invention. Are these innovations sustaining? Yes, for the industry, but do they hurt more? Do they cause a problem and a threat to the industry that wasn't there before? PERT CPM is another type of evaluation system. It's a little more in-depth, but it determines tasks. It takes you to think about how long it takes to do this task and the sequence and what is the best way for an interface before you even start. It asks you to construct diagrams on papers. Once you diagram out a sequence, you can look at the solution that you're seeing before you even start and understand whether or not the task is actually good. Does it fall in a column to where you're working out? It helps you create a decision tree. We know this. If X, then Y. Move forward, correct? Think about these processes when you're a group and how you can apply just simple decision trees on paper before you guys make anything else. Or if you have a problem, how you can work it out and diagram this. Overestimating is another problem that most managers or leaders will have in their lives. For instance, a lot of the groups are overestimating the amount of scope that they can handle inside of their projects. They forget that there's a timeline. They're disappropriate in the information and the influences they have on other people. They have to think about how to adopt certain risks. Sunk costs is always something you hear about in business. You have to be able to justify these costs. In the education world, think about your classroom. Universities have sunk costs in computers. They have to invest in computers for you to learn from. They know in 3 years they're obsolete. So they have to find ways to justify these sunk costs. Chairs, you have to have something to sit in. You have to have a desk for the computer to go on. So they have to think about the old adages of time, money. Are they recoverable? This is a little bit of economics that you'll need to get to in your reports and think about surplus and demands, the sunk costs that are evaluated in this, or should they be prudent and play it safe, but not be overconfident? Think about Apple's cost and what it came out to research and develop the iPhone. The research was around $5 million originally for the first phone. They had the potentials for salaries to go up over $1 million. They saw a life cycle cost program and they thought about the depreciation over this and over the life of the purchase for consumers. And they found that they would need to continuously, what? You got it, change the iPhone to make it more valuable to the customers and add updates. That way it wouldn't depreciate so fast and their costs would go up as well. I did a piece before to show you an example of this idea about the cost. And I used the idea of the Ligonier meter maid. We're a little town where I grew up to keep the meter maid. But before I get into that, I'll tell you a story about the Brooklyn broken window theory. It's an interesting theory that in the early 80s, a single broken window caused a wave of externalities to happen. Crime started. Just because of the single broken window, people saw that the community had less value. When it had less value, crime started to come up for petty cash and drug dealers moved in to Brooklyn. Cops were forced to check on people and watch them. An individual who pulled out his wallet for the police to show identity, was shot to death. Police thought that this wallet was a gun because they were so ready to capitalize on any event for drug dealers that they didn't realize the man was just simply trying to give his ID out and explain, I'm not a drug dealer, I'm a good person, I just went to the store and got locked out of my home. Let's go back to the idea of the meter maid for a second. This is a trickle down on how one small event can happen and cause a lot of other things. The meter maid in town has a salary of approximately $25,000 a year. She had no insurance. The township and community wanted to lay her off because they did not want to have to pay the extra money for insurance for the woman. So I wrote a report and looked at all the externalities. I figured out that over the time period of 3 years, she had wrote enough tickets to raise $1.3 million in tickets for the small community of 2,000 people. I told them that they should not let go of the person. She should be given benefits, and they should hire on 2 other people. They should buy an RFID machine for $1,450, which would allow them to have more ticketing faster. And then the second person who actually writes the tickets up and sends them out in the back end would then be able to be doing tickets as well, sending it back to a computer virtually. I said this would be great because then we wouldn't have cop layoffs because they were facing a budgetary problem. I said if you don't do this, what's going to happen is you'll have to lay off police work. And when you start laying off policemen, you have part-time people that have no commitment to the township because they don't have benefits. You'll end up having problems with crime. Yes, crime. And we saw this right away. We saw crime and graffiti started coming out on the charming little Victorian town, which caused the street workers to have overtime to go out and try to clean up the messes. Businesses started closing doors because riffraff was coming in and drugs. And eventually I told them that home values will decrease. The value of one woman and her benefits, and the value of adding a little bit of technology instead of laying off a person, I told them could raise over $3 million in another 3 years, add police officers. You could also add community centers. You could raise money for the library and find new investments for education. So the value of one is an economic thing you'll have to think about in leadership, and I'd like you to apply to your reports and ideas, is what value does this bring by bringing this innovation in? How does it help? How does it change? This is some of the great things your leadership will have to think about as well. The decision tree that you're going to do all needs to have a value and explain the what ifs. You don't take that value on. Thanks a lot, gang. I appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I'll see you all soon.